I have some questions for you this morning. They're easy ones. What do you believe? What do you believe in? Who do you believe in? Who will we be to each other? Why do we suffer? And what do we do with our pain? How will you use the time you have left? What do you want to leave behind? Where were we before we were born? And what happens after we die? Is there a meaning to our lives beyond the meaning we make? When we say the word spirit or soul, what do we mean? When we say the word God, if we say it at all, what do we mean? In whom and what do you place your deepest trust? If you were to read the story of your own life, what themes would emerge, and how would you title that book? These are theological questions. I want to talk about theology today. Specifically, I want to talk about a kind of theology that I don't have a very good word for. That's bad theology. We could call it oppressive theology or even toxic theology, but those don't feel quite right. I wish there was a better word. Maybe painful theology works, because I think that's mostly what I mean. But because I don't have a good word for what I mean, I'm going to start by defining both what I mean by theology and what I mean by painful theology, because I don't want us to jump to quick and judgmental conclusions about what painful theology is or where we find it. I think that jumping to quick and judgmental conclusions may actually be one of the hallmarks of painful theology. So first, what is theology? It literally means the organized study of God. Practically, it includes much more. Theology is just a word for that whole world of ideas about religions and all that is associated with them, beliefs and creeds, sacred texts or scriptures. We talked a lot about theology here last spring, and I learned that some of us struggle with the very idea that Unitarian Universalists have a theology, which I appreciate, because we don't all believe in God. We are not highly organized, though I like to think that is on purpose. We don't have any creeds, and our sacred texts range from the Bible to Bluey, from Rumi to the poetry of Mary Oliver. I think that Unitarian Universalist theology is complicated because it isn't singular, and that makes it harder to define, harder to pin down. In fact, one of the defining features of our theology is that we can all believe differently, and that we each have the responsibility and the freedom, but also the challenge of finding our own answers or choosing not to find them. So maybe we can only speak about Unitarian Universalist theologies in the plural. Or maybe we need a better word for that too. A new word to talk about who we are and all of the things we believe in. Our congregation, our coming together, our choice to create a community, it's not about finding the same answers. It's not about answers at all. It's about the commitments we make to each other and to the values of our faith. And if there are any beliefs we all share in common, they are probably these. We claim the inherent worth and dignity of every person, even when they don't seem to know that worth and dignity themselves, and even when we don't feel it. And we claim that being in community is important. We need it. We believe in it. Even when community is hard and so slow and so full of our human fumblings and failures. So maybe a more helpful way to think about theology, or at least what I mean by it, is something closer to meaning making. How do we make meaning of that inner, deeper dimension of our lives? How do we frame the big questions for ourselves? How do we answer them, knowing that our answers are always incomplete? Sometimes they are more like guesses. They're hopes. They're intuitions. How do we tolerate the questions we have to leave unanswered? And are there ones we can choose not to answer at all? Can we get comfortable with not knowing, with uncertainty, with the humility and vulnerability of knowing that we don't know? And still it matters. What we believe matters. It matters how we make meaning, because how we make meaning is also how we live. What we believe shapes us, of course it does. It shapes how we act, how we treat others, what we value, what we dare to hope for, maybe even what we imagine is possible, not just for us, but for the world. And in this moment in time, in our country and in our world, what we dare to hope for, what we dare to imagine matters quite a lot. So bad theology, painful theology, oppressive theology, what do I mean by that? To me, painful theology is any belief that diminishes or demeans human worth and dignity. It is the ways that people make meaning that are not life-giving, either to themselves or others. Painful theology is a belief that causes suffering, beliefs that isolate, not connect, that hurt rather than heal. Painful theology often relies on shame. It is often focused on control or punishment. And painful theology is sometimes arrogant. It assumes it is right, and it doesn't tolerate uncertainty very well. Painful theology is often, though not always, the kind that comes knocking on your door with pamphlets, or accosts you on the train or at the airport and asks you if you know Jesus. And by that question, they mean, do you know Jesus in a very specific way? Though I once had a beautiful conversation on my front step with two very young Mormon missionaries when they asked me if I knew Jesus, and I answered, I think I do, but probably not the same way that you do. We went on to have a tender and honest conversation about faith and doubt. It wasn't painful at all. I've heard a lot of painful theology in my life as a minister, and some of it makes me angry. but mostly it breaks my heart because it causes people such suffering. I want to tell you just a few of the examples I have heard. Some of these from people who didn't actually realize they believed in these things until life brought them to their knees and they were trying to pick up their broken pieces and they were trying to understand how they got where they were and how to find meaning in places where there seemed to be none. I have heard, and these are all direct quotes, "I have cancer because I did something to make God angry, but I don't know what it was. My minister told me that my child is going to hell because they are gay and God hates gay people. God could have saved my child, but must have chosen not to. I know God won't give me more than I can handle, but why is God giving me this? I am being punished. That is why this terrible thing is happening." When I hear those things, I am grateful to be able to respond with a different theology, a theology that says God is love. I told you the story last spring about the conversation I had with a woman in the Dunkin' Donuts, which is a place for those of you who are newer to the congregation, and you might not know, a lot of my best ministry seems to unfold in the Dunkin' Donuts. So I have no idea how this conversation even started, because this is not something you would jump into in the coffee line. But this woman asked me if I thought her child was in hell, because her child had recently died by suicide, and the priest that she spoke to told her that he was, because suicide is a sin. I was so angry. But I was also so glad she asked me. I was so glad I was able to tell her, no, I do not believe that. The faith tradition I represent does not believe that. And if by any chance there is such a place as hell, which I do not believe there is, your child is not there. Your child is held in love, a love vaster and greater and deeper than our understanding. And so by the end of this conversation, that we get up to the counter, we're both bawling. But sometimes painful theology is more nuanced and complicated than this, because the same belief that is painful theology for one person is life-saving for someone else. So take, for example, the belief that when something tragic happens, it's because there is a larger plan, and this terrible thing must be part of that plan. Well, I have talked to two people about this, and for one person that belief was devastating, and for the other it was deeply comforting. So that is why it is important to be humble in our meaning making, to not assume that we know or understand everything, especially when it comes to how other people make meaning, and to listen to people's stories and experiences before we jump to judgment, and to ask the question, where is love in this? For me, I think this is the essential theological question. Where is love in this? Can we find love here? Is love centered here? Is there a way to bring more love in? Because love changes things, and it opens doors we thought were sealed shut. It transforms relationships and people in ways we would not have thought possible and are sometimes beyond the scope of our imaginations. Maybe some of you read Krista Tippett's column in On Being this week. She's another one of my favorite public theologians, someone whose voice I trust. She wrote this week from Berlin, where she lived in the 1980s as a young adult, a city that was then divided in two. And she talked about remembering the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And she wrote this: "No one saw the demise of the wall coming. Even in the midst of unprecedented chaos, risk, daring, and danger, I was deeply imprinted by the clarity I felt afterwards," she says, "that there is more happening at any given moment that we do not see, and more change possible than we can begin to imagine. Our imaginations, that powerful capacity we have to literally summon new realities into being, did not reach far enough." To me, that is such a beautiful theology to hold on to at this moment in time. That there is more happening in any moment than we can know or see, and our imaginations don't reach far enough to know what is possible when we believe in the capacity of love. Here is what I believe: that love can rise up in ways we cannot even imagine. That love is rising even now, and that rising is trustworthy.